Is that okay?
Today, that is a discussion to amend the City Code Chapter 182. In addition to my colleagues here tonight, I just wanted to thank Mayor McCarthy, Commissioner Devine, and Assistant Chief Antonovich, and Ms. Barouch for being present as well. So, starting with the why, I think we've all campaigned in our respective areas on the issue of noise and just how do we address it as an entire city. So, in recognizing that this has been a chronic issue for as long as I've been on the council. I wanted to understand if there was ways that we can adjust the city code, and then also work collaboratively with the other agencies closely related to this, to just have a better impact and improve the quality of life conditions for our city residents. So before I turn it over to police and the law department for their insight and understanding of enforcement and the legality of adhering to this city code, my recommendation would be, just so everyone has a transparent understanding of my thoughts, it's one, adjusting the time frame in which sound reproduction is deemed unreasonable. So currently it is listed at 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. My recommendation is adjusting it to 9 p.m. to 9 a.m.
Sorry, what is it now? I missed what you said. 11 p.m. to 6 p.m. 11 to 6 and 9 a.m.
Yep, so I'm reading from section J, and then it is bullet number 2.
Okay.
And then again, just for accountability, it says between the hours of 11 p.m. to 6 a.m., there's occurrences of unreasonable and unnecessary sound production is like prohibited. So my recommendation is adjusting that to 9 p.m. to 9 a.m. Secondly, it is adjusting the penalties. So penalties for offenses, currently the initial request is the fine should not be anything higher than $250. My recommendation is adjusting first offenses to $500, second violations to $1,000, and then third violations allowing the city court judge to exercise their discretion not to exceed $2,000. And then we can get more into like the understanding of like my reasoning for that. And then finally, there is a section in the city code that, in the same section J, bullet 1, that last paragraph that highlights to reduce unreasonable or unnecessary noise at any time, except for activities open to the public or to the public benefit for which permission has been granted by the city of Schenectady. I think that opens the door for us to have a permit style approach. So we're not just saying no to people having unnecessary or excessive noise. We are saying within a certain confined parameters, and then that is something that we can create collectively as a council. So after giving my recommendations, I would like to turn the floor over to law enforcement department, and then following by the legal department, just of how noise complaints are addressed currently, and then if you have any recommendations right now.
Well, Mr. Chairman, if I could be allowed to give some
absolutely.
comments. Begin with, the code, I compliment you on your thought process and some of the things that you're putting forth. We look for compliance in this. It's not like you want to go out and find people, you don't want to arrest people, you want people to be able to have a good time, enjoy their property, both from a quiet perspective and if you have music or something that's going on. We follow up on every call that comes in to dispatch. People will say, no, nobody responded. Unfortunately, it's not necessarily as quick as people would like. It's a priority system that is used for the calls coming in, so they're evaluated in terms of immediate danger to life or property. Those are assigned priority 1 status. and they take precedent over anything else. Priority 2 and noise complaints are listed as priority 3. So it's unfortunate that the priority 3 calls are not followed up in this timely manner as people would like, whether it be sitting here in this table with the command staff or the neighbors, but at the staffing levels, that's the reality of our ability to do response time. And I'm not positioned to ask that we increase the police staff or other staff to deal with noise complaints at this point, where, again, how do you get common sense and people to act in an appropriate manner that is sensitive to the concerns and desires of their neighbors or the neighborhood? And so we do show up, ask people to turn stuff down. I've been out on calls where people have music blasting, police ask them to turn it down, they turn it down. 15 minutes later, the call's coming back in the same, that people have turned the noise up, the sound up, and how do you might have a key to this, Mr. Williams. If you can legislate common sense, you'll be a hero here. But it's to get that level of compliance with it. So with that, I appreciate the discussion, the dialogue, and I don't know whoever you'd like to address and add their perspective to it.
AC,
So when reading over the city ordinance on the noise violation section, when we talked about the 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. window, we also go by bullet point B, where in such a manner as to create noise that can be heard 50 feet from such device. And I know in this section it kind of refers to motor vehicles on a public highway and public waters, but also by a person on public or private property. So we utilize section B to enforce this noise ordinance 24 hours a day, not only just in that window of time that's described in section A. Regardless, as the mayor stated, a lot of the times we get these calls, and due to our staffing levels and call volume, it may take us a lot longer to arrive to deal with the situation to a point where maybe the source of the noise is no longer there. We do have the ability, if video evidence or some other type of evidence that the noise was occurring and that it was unreasonable, to file for a warrant and deal with it that way. But generally the noise has to be at an unreasonable level while the police officers are there to observe it, to follow through with any type of disciplinary action that would come from this. However, in certain circumstances, we can file charges for evidence that we have that supports those charges that we didn't personally witness at the time of the event. There have been situations where, as the mayor stated, where a police officer arrives, gives a courtesy warning for them to turn the music down, and oftentimes that suffices and people do comply with those orders. There are a lot of times where they comply in our presence, and then shortly after we leave, they turn the music back up. We have gone through and created, I wouldn't say a database, but there are addresses that have been chronic offenders of this ordinance, that it has been a message given to all platoons that if you're responding to these addresses for an issue along these lines, that they are not to be given zero tolerance for those addresses, because they are chronic offenders of this particular section, and that currently any kind of warnings or discretion that's been given to them in the past has not been taken with respect. So We're trying to cut off issues where one officer arrives, gives a courtesy warning to turn the music down, then the issue happens again and you have a different officer who arrives. And they didn't realize that the first officer had just given that warning, and so now they're giving a warning. And how many times can a different officer arrive to the same place and give a warning, and what's the best way of making sure that everybody is aware that warning has been given? We do have systems in place that should be followed, where you make notes in the call and it kind of goes under the premise history, what we call it in our RMS system. So we encourage officers to check premise history before responding to these calls, so they can see if a warning has been given and when was the last one. Or if the premise is one of the ones that we spoke about, that's a chronic offender and that we don't, that they have zero tolerance directive for that address. Beyond that, if an officer responds to these calls and sees that the noise ordinance is being violated, at that point, like you said, there are different penalties for each offense, up to a third offense, where I think that was where it maxes out. There is the ability of the officer to remove the source of the noise as well. And I'm not sure that it's exactly clear on if we could do that right off the bat on the very first one, or if we have to wait until the third. But there are situations where, you have, somebody was speaking to me earlier today about a Dodge Ram pickup truck that had $60,000 worth of subwoofers and speakers that took up the entire back of the truck bed with a hydraulic lift that makes it stand straight up. In that situation, are we able to take the whole vehicle and hold it until trial? Create a hardship for that person, but it's also, I don't know how you even play speakers that large in a reasonable manner. I don't know if it's possible. It's challenging because people have so many different avenues to reproduce this noise. If you take one set of speakers away and a new set just pops up where the old one was. I know that we have confiscated systems in the past, and there is an avenue for them to retrieve their property after the case has been adjudicated, or the processes that they have to go through to take possession of their property. The other thing is, when we do make arrests on these, it's an appearance ticket, it's not a custodial arrest. So generally cooperative people, we will fill out, and this is a appearance ticket that we've been working on with Mr. Toro, and John Palmy was a part of the effort, where it's a streamlined appearance ticket process that kind of everything's on one form, much like it allows the officers to handle the call more efficiently than have to go back and be out of service for an extended period of time filling out, different informations and reports in triplicate, whereas this one form can be submitted. The only thing is that that person never leaves their home. If they do, if they're an uncooperative person, they need to be escorted to the police car to be given their appearance ticket. At the issuance of the appearance ticket, they're released back to their home or to wherever they were taken from. And basically they're free to go back right to doing what it was that got them in trouble in the first place, should they choose to do that. So there's only so much that we can do at that point. So it becomes frustrating when you have repeat offenders. I did some kind of quick, I got some quick data from analysts, and year to date, there's only about 20 arrests for noise ordinance violations with some repeat offenders on here. And then there's a vast majority of the calls that come in that the dispositions for those are dark and quiet, gone on arrival, unfounded. And so I think a lot of this has to do with the periods of time where these calls are most likely to come in are also periods of time that are very busy for the police department. And on days where the staffing levels are not the best, Friday nights, Saturday nights, that type of thing. And a lot of situations like today, a large portion of our staffing was tied up on Odell Street with the barricaded subject that they have. It's still not resolved at this point. So, much to what the mayor is stating, should a noise ordinance violation come in to the call center, during a day like today, the ability for us to respond there in a timely manner is prohibited by all of our resources being utilized for things that have been determined to be a higher priority. So this I'm sure every council member gets complaints about this, and between this and traffic, this is probably what I get the most complaints about to my office. So if there's any way that we can figure out as a group to better deal with this issue or gain compliance more effectively, I'd be happy to do it. But at this point, this is kind of what we do and how it goes and the challenges that we're facing.
And then if you wouldn't also mind just speaking about the drones as first responders,
Yes.
that is definitely a component of those discussions that really captured my eye, and kind of speaking to the bullet points about the cost of having a law enforcement officer respond to the incident, and also just the speed at which they can respond. So if you have any information about that.
So it is definitely something that we plan to utilize once the program is up and running. We actually started this week with reassigning a couple of our officers temporarily to kind of get the ball rolling on this. And the actual responder drones are expected to arrive early in the beginning of 25 or late 24. However, we do have drones currently that don't have the capabilities of these drones, but we're going to be starting to fly some first responder type missions within the next few weeks. And what we will have the ability to do once this program is up and running, provided that it meets all the legal requirements, which I'm sure we'll discuss with the law department before taking this action. But as I stated, if evidentiary, something of evidentiary value that can kind of meet what we need to file charges, even if we can't be there in person, we might be able to get that evidence with the drones and have an officer review the footage, or maybe the drone pilot review the footage and then initiate a warrant packet for the problem property. I'm not sure what additional challenges that might face at this point as far as being able to determine who's responsible for the music. Would you be able to do that with a drone? If it's outside, there's a possibility we could get the footage of where the music is coming from, and maybe for repeat offenders or chronic offenders, we would know that this address, I see the person who's been responsible for it before, this is the same system that's playing the music, this is the same person who's out there playing the music. Sometimes it'll be very cut and dry who's responsible.
Yeah.
There may come a time where it might be difficult just from the footage alone, and a little bit further investigation may need to happen to determine exactly who's at fault and who can be fined for this. And then you get to a level of how much effort do we want to put into a violation when we have the priority situations that would require more manpower. I do believe, though, that the drone as a first responder is a tool that we're going to be able to utilize to assist with this issue. And I think it will be effective. I just don't want to, I want to be cautiously optimistic about it. I don't want to say that it's going to be the magic bullet that stops all of this. Because there will still be challenges. And it won't be, something that can cure it all. But I think it is going to be a very effective tool once it's up and running.
Thank you. Any questions or comments before I turn it over to Ms. Roush? Ms. Patrick?
So in terms of the arrests that have been made, I was wondering about the financial penalties and to what extent those get paid, or whether, folks just don't pay them and then what happens, that type of thing.
I would not have much information on the follow through with people paying the fines that they've been given. I can definitely get that. I don't know if maybe the law department has better information on that. But as far as my understanding of the way things work is if somebody's given a penalty by a judge and they don't follow through with that, then eventually there will be bench warrants or things that would come into place that would make them responsible for those things. Because I think just ignoring it or not doing it once something is adjudicated, it's not, that they're gonna have to follow through one way or the other.
So we typically, we try to request of the court that the fine be paid at the time of sentencing so that we don't have to chase people for money. Unfortunately, we don't have control. The judges many times give people time to pay. So I'd have to go into records to see how much we've collected in fines based on what we were sentenced to. But a lot of people, in a lot of cases, we do get the money the same day. But sometimes people are given time to pay, and that's not as easy for us to track.
Thank you.
And I will say, based on, and I'm sure everybody here is aware, but based on the ordinance, in those situations where we discuss, giving, even whether it's an arrest or a warning, and then the music goes on 15 minutes later, we show back up. If it's a half an hour after we've given that advisement or made that arrest, it counts as a new incident.
Yep.
So twice in the same night, as long as it's a half an hour apart, counts as the second violation. So the fees for that would go in line with the second and third, as it continues.
Any other questions or comments, Mr. Rivera?
So you mentioned arrest, so when the officer shows up at the resident, is there physically arresting those people or they issue a court appearance ticket?
Right, so it's not a custodial arrest, so it would be an appearance ticket. There have been situations where somebody gets escorted to the police car to fill out the paperwork, but as far as putting them in handcuffs and bringing them down to the station, that doesn't normally happen for this.
Is there a process where the individual that files a complaint is notified of the action and the action taken?
So the complainant being made aware. So there are, one of the questions that the dispatchers usually ask is, would you like the police to contact you? There are times where we will arrive, unfortunately the music or the source of the loud noise is no longer there, but the person who called it in does want to speak with an officer, so they'll get out of the car, they'll go in and speak with the complainant, and then that person can, in their own words, explain directly to the officer what the issue is. And there are times where it's late at night, they're already having a hard time sleeping, so they don't want to be bothered to get out of the bed any more than they've already been bothered by the noise, so they prefer that the issue just be dealt with and they don't want to have anything more to do with it. For those situations, we don't make a call or a notification that the problem's been solved.
Mr. Twell?
Thank you very much. It sounds like you have a handle on everything, the department, and handling it with complete efficiency at this point.
Trying to.
Right? When we make the phone call, which I make multiple times a year, in my neighborhood, again, you wait, sometimes, the police happen to show up right away and we're sitting on the front porch waiting or just a little talk or something, but, so I'm at least happy to know that things are being addressed as efficiently as they are. Sometimes there's a time constraint, but, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So in terms of the number of calls, like say for instance, there's a party, so, maybe down the street calls next door, et cetera. Do you have, is there a specific number you say, we received this number of calls, the same evening regarding the same incident, in that case, we then take away their equipment or shut down the party?
So, as far as shutting down parties go, people are allowed to have parties in their private residences, to an extent. Obviously, parties that you're advertising and charging for are a little bit different. The after-hours parties that have been kind of plaguing our city for some time now. We've had a lot of religious ceremonies that get called in because sometimes they're pretty loud, especially with certain cultures and wedding celebrations. In those situations, we try to discreetly make advisements that we understand this is a religious ceremony, but it is violating the noise ordinance. We don't want to disrupt what's going on here, but can you please turn it down? And more than often than not, they comply with those. As far as based on when there are multiple calls for the same problem coming from different people, it kind of indicates to us that it kind of increases the legitimacy. We understand that, this must really be bothering a lot of people when we're getting multiple calls from different people about the same problem. But it doesn't necessarily affect the way that we respond to it. Even one call, as long as we show up and it meets that criteria, we're going to handle the call the way that it should, or hopefully it'll be handled the way that it should be handled by, if you show up and it's very a severe violation of the ordinance, then their reaction as officers are probably going to be more severe in that they're more likely to take away the source of the noise on the first response if it's so unreasonable that they don't deserve a warning. Now, if we show up and it's somebody who it's borderline unreasonable, then we're probably not going to take their the source of the noise away on the first go round. So there isn't like if we get called 3 times than this, or if 4 people call than this, it only takes 1, but it's for the officers to determine when they get there what's the level of reasonableness of this. How unreasonable is it? Is how egregious is the call? And I think a lot of times if it's and a lot of this I'm kind of speaking from my own personal experience where the time that I spent as a patrol officer responding to calls like this, personally, if I got there and, I recall one instance, it was on Crane and Orchard. I remember I was midnight, I hadn't even received a call for it yet, but I was driving around, the windows were down, and I could hear very, very loud music coming from a large apartment building that was right across from Original Pizza. And I saw an elderly woman on like the 3rd floor kind of looking out her window with her hands like this, and I could tell that the music was coming from above. So I was like, I don't need a call for this, that's enough for me. So I went in there, I found the source of the music, gave them an advisement to turn it down. I got halfway down the stairs, I could hear the music already again, so I turned right around before I even left the house, and I took the power cord to their stereo and issued an appearance ticket to the violator. So that was the way I chose to deal with removing the source of the music, and it seemed to work for that night. But again, I feel like the removal of the source of the music is based on the ordinance. It's discretionary, and sometimes it's difficult when you have speakers that are as big as that window, or things that are not necessarily, you don't have the ability to take them and put them in the police car. So I don't know if I answered your question. If there's anything more that you want me to elaborate that I didn't.
No, that kind of, I was just kind of trying to figure out what are the guidelines, like, I've had 5 calls from 4 different people, and what am I gonna do about it, so.
I mean, that's definitely taken into consideration, as well as how severely they're violating the ordinance.
And how do you measure the sound? Like, you heard that, you just talked about how you heard it from the window. Do you have some actual instrument that measures the sound that people can't argue with, like,
Right.
What's loud to me may not be loud to you?
So in the ordinance, it talks about being 50 feet away from where the source of the music is, so, I mean, we're trained at estimating speed and distance and that type of thing, so it's pretty safe to say, you know, when you're 50 feet away from something and you can hear it. But as far as a decibel measuring device, we don't have that. I know that they exist, and same, you know, similar to like a window tint measuring device. And I wanna say those, I mean, they would be applicable, I just don't know how necessary they are, because it's probably an expense that would just kind of confirm how loud it is, but the fact is, as long as you're 50 feet from it and you can hear it and it's bothering someone, you're checking all the boxes you need to check right there. I don't believe, you know, being able to say that it was exactly this decibels, you know, whether it was, you know, 1 decibel over what would be deemed as reasonable or 50. And I don't even know how much, in terms of decibels, if that's even a reasonable thing to say. But, common sense and what a reasonable person would deem to be too loud, I think is what we go on.
Mr. McSenior.
Are there, like civil avenues, if a neighbor, their neighbor has been ticketed 3-4 times and they've gotten fined, can that complaint and take the neighbor to civil court on their own? Is that an option? I don't know, you know, kind of putting it in their hands that they can do something themselves about it.
Yeah.
So they address it.
I'll defer to that.
Can I just address that? It's some time ago, council, maybe your predecessor passed section 183, which you're talking about 182, the nuisance abatement ordinance, which we have just started for the first time ever to enforce. And we had our first hearing, we closed down the lesson that was all sorts of violations. I forget, I did the hearing at the mayor's appointment as the hearing officer. And 12 points in 12 months is considered a nuisance, and this property had about 60 points. And but 3 points are, since we're focusing on noise, a violation of section 182 is 3 points under section 183. So that, when you add in 12 points in 12 months, that means you had 4 violations in a year. Then you would have, there is a civil procedure to take care of this, which we're now starting to enforce, which hadn't been enforced by, it's on.
Great movie.
But, so we're starting to enforce that. It hadn't been enforced by the Fire Corporation Council until Maxine came in. And so, kind of wearing 2 hats here. We are now starting to enforce that. If you were looking for amendments to certain parts of the city code, maybe you want to increase the point value from 3 to 4 or something like that in section 183, and then there'd be 3. You know, if you increase it, there'd be 3 calls in a year, and then we can take the remedies into that section. So it's a thought.
3 calls in 1 night.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing too.
Half hour
is
apart,
you know, it sort of ties in with what the chief was saying, that you know, if you go away for a half hour and you have to come back, that's another incident. You already have 6 points.
Yeah.
In 1 night. And that might have a chilling effect on the people who turn it up when they leave.
And if I can add, and I'll get you.
One more thing though, which I think is good for the drones. You know, going back to when my court had on, there might be some due process arguments about the drones and individual liability. But certainly from the air, you can tell whether a property is a problem. And that's what the nuisance statute is about. It's about the property, and the property continues to be a problem. And so the drones, I think, would also be a good tool in terms of enforcing this ordinance.
So if I can add, I think the Mayor was like, is there a magic ball or an answer? And I think trying to hedge our bets, if we look at this as a three-pronged approach, I think you have the city code, and speaking on the news, I think I misspoke and said it hasn't been adjusted or amended in 3 decades. It's not the case. It's almost 2 decades, but still, that's a long amount of time. And if we look at what has changed since 2006, a lot has. I think if we evaluate how to adjust our enforcement to incorporate other technologies and making sure the legalities of how they're adjudicating these types of cases, I think that improves the conditions for a lot of our residents who, in some instances, feel like they are helpless. Where it is a beautiful day out, my windows are open, and now I have to inconvenience myself further to have a slightly better day. And the frustration is, what do I do? And I'm glad Mr. Toro highlighted that it is not at the lack of consideration from the police department. It truly is not. And on my ride-alongs, I've seen the calls come in, and although you want to respond to all of them, we physically cannot. So unfortunately, I think it has to be an understanding from the community of we can only be in bus so many places at once. But I think if the perception from our residents is if I call, nothing happens because it keeps happening day in and day out. And if also the perception is from these violators, I use that lightly, because if some people aren't aware of the code and they just think it's a free-for-all, I can put $60,000 worth of equipment in my car, I think starting somewhere is important. But I wanted to give Mr. Rivera an opportunity.
Yes, going back to the point system, I can recall that we did actually amend that to kind of target the convenience stores in terms of the point system. So you're mentioning the point system, I think if I can recall a couple of years, we had instituted that just because of the many problem we were having at these convenience stores and how do we address it over a given period of time. And the suggestion to us, and based on giving a recommendation to institute the point system. So I'm not sure the point system that was passed a couple of years ago can carry over into the residential. We might want to amend that to include the right cross section of the violation, and not only the convenience stores or any deli or any sort of things like that we did. And that point system, actually, that is true. It was never, we never get a chance to kind of enforce it. There were so many excuses.
Oh, it didn't get approved?
No.
Okay, as I was gonna say.
It was approved, but never got enforced.
Right.
From the law department. The commissioner is correct about that.
So I did want a follow-up question, I didn't want to.
In the commission, I think a private residence could be a nuisance. I believe.
We would have to pull that resolution. It was primarily targeted towards the convenient delis to kind of bring them in compliance, so whenever they come back, they apply for the renewal. The mayor, the police chief, fire department, everybody will sit there and says, okay, you got X amount of violation, and if they was actually enforcing it, and if they met that 12.16 fine, automatically they could be closed within that given year. But unfortunately, we never had the enforcement. I'm glad that law department is looking into
That would be, we're doing it.
Yes, I'm glad, yes.
And if it is limited to convenience stores, which I'm not sure, you could change it to noise coming from anywhere.
Right.
So when we did talk about the point system, but the commissioner is correct. There is, in the nuisance, part of the code of nuisance, you can, people with individual residents can get violations based on the nuisance, code. But we were targeting the convenience stores and really trying to focus on that because then we did have so many problems.
Yes.
But that part of the code is already there for individuals, so maybe we need to tighten up to, improve it. Amend whatever way necessary.
Yeah.
I do like that idea in the next 183, bringing it from 4 to, different point levels for residents.
Yeah, so
And somewhere in here, and of course I forgot my glasses today, so the landlords are responsible.
Their prescription.
It's somewhere in here, it's the landlords.
Yeah.
So it gives the exception
Right.
of somebody who's leasing the property from the landlord, so the
Responsible.
landlord can't be held responsible
right.
for the
Which
music.
makes
Can't
sense.
be, right.
They, really?
Well, no,
I know they
I
can be, I
did.
think.
Well, they can.
So I thought it identified that.
It's P, it's
I'll read.
PB, P2B.
Oh,
So
right.
it's,
I think it's,
section 3, and it is category, or section, 182-4. And it's within that initial paragraph, it says, for the purposes of this chapter, it shall be presumed that the owner, tenant, person or persons in possession or control, and the occupants of the particular premises are jointly or severely,
this is severally,
or several times.
no, that's a weird word.
So I think it identifies that whether you're directly or indirectly, you're responsible
Right.
for that reproduction of noise, to some extent. And then my question was going to be following
It's right here,
up on, was, you mentioned earlier, AC Antonovich, about people having video evidence that they're taking themselves, and I wanna caution against people kind of going out, getting 4K cameras and getting their ghillie suits, like, and then going to extreme, but also I wanna make sure we're documenting what is necessary to proceed forward. Is that sufficient enough?
To meet that threshold. And it, there can be issues where how do we prove that this video is taken on this date, at this time, at this location? Which I'm sure there are ways, but maybe the law department might wanna.
Most of these don't go to trial. Most people plead arraignment or at a hearing, putting a court date following that. So we prepare discovery, if we need to, which would be pictures or videos if we have them. But most of the time, like I said, we don't wind up getting to the point of having to go to a trial to prove it. People generally take a lower fine to settle it, rather than risk going to a trial and risking getting the maximum fine.
And I think that's where I want to kind of focus on, because I'd like for us to have these fines strictly adhered to change the culture and narrative, that this is something that we are focusing in on, especially if, by the time we do address them, it comes at extreme cost in time and responses.
So my question is around the fine, and as Ms. Barash is saying, that once they go to court, the judge has sort of some leeway in what they can do, they can reduce those fines. So is there a way that it's hard and fast, or do they always have the ability to negotiate what the person can pay? Because what happens sometimes is people are like, I can afford that, and I'm willing to pay that. As opposed to, I'll give you an example that happened, there was somebody putting out their trash early. And so I rolled down the window, I was like, it's too early to put out your trash. They're like, oh, it's only $50 off, like, I can afford that, no big deal. And so I was like, really? I heard it was going up to 200. They were like, whoa. So, and I did hear that. And so, I think it matters how it impacts them financially also. So once it gets in front of a judge, we absolutely have no control over it. The judge then can say, this can go from $1,000, they can bring it down to $100.
I mean, the judge certainly has full control to do that, but we generally go in and make an offer. I mean, the judges typically follow what we agree to with the defendant. So we'll conference with the defendant, or we'll make the offer in open court. So the maximum fine for the first offense is $250. So in order to increase the likelihood that someone is going to settle, typically we offer $150 fine. Sometimes it's as high as $200 if there's something egregious about it. If we were to go hard and fast with the maximum fine, then there's not necessarily a reason for people to settle. And so then you have the added resources of the city having to prosecute cases through trial, not knowing whether the extra $50 or $100 is really gonna make a difference in how it hits someone's wallet. So if you want the fine for example, the first violation to be hard and fast at $250, then my recommendation would be to raise the fines generally so that we could offer $250 as a way to settle it, rather than, again, there's a lot of resources that go into trying a case, and it becomes, is it worth it to the city to do that? I mean, of course, in some cases we have to, but to do that on every single one, because we want the maximum fine. The only way to alleviate that is to raise the fine, if you want to collect $250, or we can offer $200, that's just $50 less. But again, the further away you go from the maximum fine, the less likely someone's going to be to plead and to just agree to pay the fine rather than go through the trial process where they may be found not guilty.
Ms. Patrick?
Well, that's why, I mean, I when you suggested the 500, the 1,000, and the 2,000, I just felt like, in looking at this, I felt like, okay, these were probably set so that there'd be more affordability for people to be able to pay the fine. So I hear, obviously, that might be a stronger deterrent, but I just wonder if it would, at those levels, mean that more and more people wouldn't pay the fine. And then we'd have to go through all the rest of the processes. But I hear why you're saying increase them. I get that, but I just was worried that it would increase the workload on the other end of trying to pursue someone that may not be able to afford $500 or $1,000 or $2,000.
But my response is, why are we being convenient to violators? And my hope is, as you enforce this, we do not live in a big city, or it is big in some respects, but it truly is not. And I am under the perception of, once it is starting to circulate throughout our neighborhoods, that the city of Schenectady is pursuing the maximum penalties for these types of offenses. I have to believe that individuals who are violating are going to take a second pause, or understand the severity of how we are evaluating these types of complaints moving forward. Because my caution is, to what extent do we expect our residents to continue to be complicit? And have we already lost residents from our city as we continue to revitalize our neighborhoods, revitalize our downtown? If we don't have the people here, it's for naught. So I think that is more of a worry for me. Who is turning away from Schenectady because of our inability to correct this? Not because we don't have the intent, but just because we lack the execution in implementing this. So I think we have to pick a path. Ms. Porterfield?
So for me, when I look at the fines, I don't see it as a way so they have the ability to pay. To me, I look at it as a deterrent. It's like, don't make the noise, and this will cost you again. And I wonder if when police officers go out, do they even have that discussion with people about that? Do they even know their fines exist for them? If you continue to do this, it's gonna cost you, the city could fine you $250, et cetera. Are people aware? Because sometimes awareness makes a difference as well. If they know eventually, if this continues, it's going to cost them money.
There are definitely circumstances where those conversations are had. There are also circumstances where the conversations don't ever occur because the person's just looking at us through a door that they refuse to open. So I think in a perfect world where we would be able to take somebody and have a conversation with them and explain to them, why we're there, the problem with what's going on, how to resolve it, and what the penalties are, and somebody being open and receptive to that conversation, I think, that would be great, and I think we'd probably have more success, but unfortunately, all of our interactions don't end up going that way. Some people are very combative and confrontational, or under the influence of substances, and not really in a position to really comprehend what we're explaining to them. But it is something that I will bring to my the patrol unit and explain that, try your best to be very transparent about what the penalties are for being found guilty of this, especially for multiple offenses or repeat offenses. And I know that is happening, but I'll try to put more emphasis on trying to do that as much as possible.
I mean, it's conceivable that we could just actually create just a little small document, a warning slip that says like, here.
Right.
And for people when they no longer need me, you can just read through it.
Yeah.
And just so they have something that documents that we were here, and this is a concern, and here's the possible outcomes if this continues.
We have done that for other things, like informational handouts for, you know, this is what happens if you're the victim of a crime, this is what happens when, you know, a detective is assigned to your case, so, you know, that might be beneficial to give a shot.
Mr. McGrain?
Yeah, I'm just going back to what was mentioned moments ago in terms of video evidence. It's a good thing, but I don't think we should encourage it to get people out there to go to video someone because it might put people in danger. But can we do an affidavit statement and have them submit that in terms of, because video evidence, and you just mentioned it can be dangerous because the person is intoxicated and you're going to video them so that you can get evidence for your case. And here you are on a premises, and you know X, Y, Z can happen.
In those situations, that person would probably have to testify or have their name on the documentation, so
I think that is something we should encourage that to give them an opportunity to say, yes, if you are there and you are the witness of it, there's an opportunity for you to submit an affidavit statement to justify what you're telling the police department. Looking at this here and talking on the side of the commissioner, I think we need to look at 182 and 183, chapter 183, because it's very important to look at 183 also, because that's where the abatement is, because there are certain things that we passed here a couple of years ago in terms of points that is relevant all the way to 183 that we need to address also, because revising 182, it wouldn't make any sense if we do not revise 183. So we need to broaden our scope at this point in time.
Well, I think,
Ms. Patrick?
yeah, I think actually, and we kind of touched on this at a previous meeting, but even when we talk about the vehicle piece, which I hope we will, that also will probably impact a different ordinance as well in terms of traffic, right, I think.
Sure.
So that would be there as well. And there is, I mean, I guess I thought that 182.7 was how a citizen makes a formal complaint, Mr. Rudebaron, but I was wondering, a question that I had was just to the extent to which people might fear putting their name to something or the retaliation. I mean, I know I have felt that myself, even when I've called to make noise complaints, and you know, I get, well, what's your name? And it's kind of like, oh, you know, obviously I give them my name and my address and such, but there's always that, you know, I always say, is the person going to know who it was?
And I think that's why we take every effort to be the witness of the violation, so that the initial caller is not even part of the proceedings. It's the officer who personally observed the violation and you know, based it off of their direct knowledge.
Mr. Jordan?
Going back to the fines, I mean, at this point, I'm okay with what's in there. You know, again, you're in your yard, maybe having a birthday party, and you got neighbors who don't want to hear you. It's tolerable to you, so, you know, all of a sudden, police show up at my door and they're like, you know, turn it down. There's
About 2,000, yes.
Right. That's good to know.
But I think what we're identifying in here, and I think it's different. If we have a community that's hesitant to put their name on these documents, so you're not having them attach their name, which is a huge component if the police department is unable to respond to every incident, which we know they're not. That's why I think it is crucial for the incidences that they do respond to, for us to have a strong approach. And I push back, and out of fear of how the community, I think, is going to respond to us if we remain slow or cautious to do anything different. I just had an email, and in one regard, the resident says, hey, this is an issue, I'm glad you're talking about it. Then the later half of the email, he goes, I don't really think you guys are gonna really do anything. And that is the expectation that I hear day in and day out. It's why even bother? I'm just going to suck this up and get through it. And I don't think we're talking about the cocktail parties where you're celebrating a birthday. I think I'm talking about, I know I'm talking about the earth-shattering, window-pounding vibrations. And I think that is something that people can tell the difference on. And if you're roping in those same arguments, I wholeheartedly hope that the other members in our committee, this public safety committee, will at least allow the public to weigh in during public comment if we choose to do something differently. But I urge the community to come out and give us your experiences, give us your stories, because that's what's going to be needed to ensure that what we're doing is with the right intent. But I think staying the course, that sends a poor message to the community, and we have to do something different. And the reason why I'm advocating for something as strong as this, because without that, without the drones, without the law enforcement officers, there's a huge gap. Mr. McGurn?
Yes, going back, and I had it marked the last time we met to modify the section 182.7 because there are many people there who doesn't have a problem put their name to an affidavit. So I would like to see that we put that in there and give them an opportunity, whoever so desire, there's an opportunity for you to make a statement and sworn to it, that yes, you're witnesses, and if the case was to go to trial, they will show up and testify on that. We can't just leave it blank and then we're not giving them opportunity, because video evidence is one, not a lot of people will do that, and I don't encourage that, safety reason, but adding that into this section will help. And yes, you talk about the shattering glasses. This is why we need to look at the modified speaker, because if we can address the modified speaker with the hydraulic lift and putting the speaker on top of these SUVs and on the car, then what we're doing here, it's just a waste of time. So that's why I would like to defer to law department. How can we put something in place to target these modified speakers where they have all these hydraulic system in their car? Do we need to come up with something from the law department to kind of revise the city charter to address that specifically? Because we have seen over the several months into the summer here, a lot of those activities where they're calling them car meets. Bombard's meet, and they're loud explosion with music, and it's affecting the neighborhood. That's the thing we need to address, and at the same time, this is going to be addressing these are residential. But then when we look at the car and driving down the street and shattering everybody's glass and shaking, how do we report to law department on that?
Yeah, I really want to talk about the vehicles, and I have to just say, coincidentally, I was on my walk this morning, headed back towards my house, and there was a vehicle, and I, had just finished, going through all of this, and there was a vehicle parked on, I think I was on Keys, on the side of the road, blaring music out the window, just sitting in front of this house. And they just kept pumping it up higher and higher and higher. And I actually, the person I walked with said, don't, because I literally wanted to go over and say, hey, you really, and my walking partner said, don't you dare go over there, in case, something happened. But I think the car thing is really important. And Ms. Porterfield brought up at our last meeting about the mufflers, and the fact that people are, modifying the mufflers, which is in 182.4 section B. And I wanted to bring up that, I think also we might consider a penalty on installers. I mean, I don't know if people are just installing them themselves or if there's actually places that we could, think that this is happening at different service places. I don't know. But I mean, that, to me, I think they should be fined as well. If there's people that are actually installing these modified devices, that we should issue some sort of penalty there as well.
My question probably is for Mrs. Sushi, is it legal? I see you trying to leave
I don't wanna be rude, I had an obligation, so I don't.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it so these modified things on the cars, the mufflers,
It's crazy.
the speakers, all that, are those legal? I mean,
So
isn't there something, some part of law that says you can't
Can't do it
modify your
right
vehicle to that degree?
yeah, there's in the vehicle and traffic law, there's an entire section that covers modifications or it's what we call equipment violations. So there's a whole section with legal tolerances for certain additions or modifications that are made to vehicles that go all the way from, how high off the ground your license plate is supposed to be. So it really gets into the weeds on those types of modifications and, pertaining to the equipment on the vehicle.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're fine, you don't need to answer this, so, and everyone knows, see click fix, and,
Right.
you're good, and,
Thank you very much. Have a good
Schenectady
weekend.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
The Schenectady PD's website, I mean, I'm on there frequently, especially with the loud noises, this white Audi that drives by my house and shakes the whole house constantly, so of course I get license plates. The other day in front of the funeral home, there's a black Lexus, I actually walked up and told the gentleman to turn it down. I mean, it just shakes and it vibrates, I take their license plate numbers and the make of the car, and I turn it in on the SPD website, so they can be aware of what's out there, and I encourage everyone to do that. On that website, you can either put your name, which I always do, or it can be anonymous, so again, just so that, they can't be everywhere, so they have an idea of what's going on, so. And I just want to say, this is a huge issue with me as well, so I'm not, by Mr. Williams, when I said the fines, I'm okay with the fines. I'm not doing anything, there's things that need to be done, and again, I don't even know if people realize that there are fines for disturbances like this. And as far as a cocktail party in the yard, yeah, when people's yards abut each other, people are trying to have a conversation at their back table, and the people behind them are playing not excessively loud music. They've actually walked over, asked the individuals to lower the music, but the people don't. So you don't have any choice but to reach out to the PD. So it's not, there are individuals that are being annoyed, not by loud, vibrating music, just everyday music that's too loud in your neighborhood when you're trying to enjoy yourself, out painting or reading or having a general conversation at your table. So I just wanted to say that, but I would just break things down, put it out, report whatever you see, whenever.
Ms. Francine?
I was just wondering, in regard to vehicles, the speakers, does section 182.4 J2B address that?
I looked at that, I don't know if it really does well enough.
Yeah.
Not really well enough, I think it's a little bit too vague.
Yeah.
Yeah.
182, could you just repeat that, please?
Sure, 182-4 J under sound reproduction.
182, okay, yeah. Oh, no, yeah.
2B.
Yeah, no,
Well, not 2B.
no, that is where we talk about the mufflers and such.
Right, but I think it needs to be nailed down a little bit more in terms of modifying it.
I agree,
A lot
I
of them are
totally agree.
Especially the ones that those low rider cars that are right on the ground.
It's
They're all over the city.
182-4, section B, noisy vehicles. And B3 is, that's where I put my question about whether places that install it could also get fined. But I don't know enough about it to know whether that's how these mufflers are being modified.
Yeah, they take them someplace.
They do take them someplace.
Or they know how to do it themselves. My only other comment, I really wanted to make sure that we, as we're considering all these things, because I get a lot of complaints about this construction, so we have to make sure when we're looking at construction, but construction people start work at 6 in the morning, is what they do. So, how do we even address that, because that gets them from 6 to 3, they just work early, that's all
6 to
they're
9.
doing.
I also circled that, but I think that, people, especially like when you think about the summertime,
Yeah.
I think that folks are trying to get their work done.
Yeah.
In terms of the early morning hours where it's less humid,
That's
that kind of
not-
thing. So I think that one's a tough one, and people might just have to deal with, the construction noise, but.
My response would be, if you're dealing with it as you're driving to work, if you're dealing with it as you're trying to go to sleep at night, and if you're dealing with it because the roads are getting paved or repaved again, to what avail? So I think it's just a lot. I know we weren't meant to kind of solve anything, it was more to
No.
have like a pre-conversation
Yeah.
for our community meeting, which I very much want to just identify. I appreciate everyone coming out and being present for this discussion. I also want to make sure we capture the fact that Ms. Brosh, I want to make sure we heard her statement of, if we're going to continue with these efforts, it has to be worth your time, and that's what I hear. Or you don't have the ability to respond to every incident for small figures. Did I not hear you correctly? Where trying to not go to trial, you're accepting pleas because to go to trial for every offense is not realistic, especially if the fine ultimately is $250.
Yes, I mean, it doesn't really make sense to take everyone to trial. But if that's what the council wants, we can do that. I mean, if we're here to do what, we implement what you legislate. So if the council wants us to take everyone to trial, we can, but unfortunately, that's going to stress the resources of the law department. If we had unlimited resources, that might be different, but that's just not the reality of it. We're a small but mighty team, and the thing is that taking everything to trial, if you take it to trial, you have to prove the case, and we may not always be able to because of certain circumstances, and then we can do all that work, and then we get zero. So when we take pleas, it kind of works for both sides, because it's a deterrent to the offender because they've had to pay a fine, and at the same time, the law department doesn't have to put in all of the effort and resources to take it all the way to trial. But again, if the council were to decide that, we would certainly take everyone to trial. My recommendation instead would be, if you want $250 to be the standard that we request of the court, or that we agree to as a plea, then raise the maximum fine so that we're giving them a quote-unquote break in order to plea bargain. That's why people plea, because they're taking a lesser penalty in exchange for them also not having the risk of going to court and losing and having to pay the maximum fine. It's all a negotiation when you go to court.
And before I open it up to questions again, I just want to make it clear, my intent is not for the law department to take everyone to trial. I don't think we are truly going to have everyone documenting or submitting in these complaints, because in some regards, that is a luxury that others have than not, where I think if you're working 2 jobs, or if you're riding a bus and you don't have a computer, I think you're limited in how you can submit a complaint. But what I will say is, I think if we are at least responding to the egregious offenders, I think, yes, we need to have a strong expectation to see those through with no considerations for pleas, because again, I think that sets an undue precedence where, to Ms. Porterfield's point, what is $50? And if you know you're having this party and you want to enjoy yourself, what's $200 to have a good time? Mr. Graham.
Let me go back to the modified exhaust. During our discussion in terms of the fee increase, proposed fee increase, which we're gonna hear from Monday from the police department, we touched on the modified exhaust on the speaker, and there is no legislation directly to kind of look into modified speaker. But so exhaust is a state law. So what the police can only do is to enforce it. And by enforcing it, they will get a portion of that revenue. So I think that's what they're going to be touching on Monday in terms of, because we can, as a local body, institute that. It's a state law, so they will try to see how they can put resource to enforce that, like how they do the DWI check and all these different seatbelt stuff to get that going. So I don't know how we can address that on the local level, but more the PD enforcement and whenever they have the resources to the. In terms of the fee, I just want to talk and the garbage, nuisance violation and the garbage violation. I mean, yes, we have seen a lot of violation there, but then if you go into the neighborhood 2 months ago and you were to go back today, you will see drastic difference. The garbage can is not on the front porch, and garbage can is not on the front sidewalk. They're all the way at the back of the house. Why? Because somebody received a violation that you were not putting, your garbage was improperly stored. So it's more of an enforcement to tell you that you are in violation of your garbage, take it to the back of the house. So I think with the approach here, I don't have an issue either up or down with the fees, but it's more of a enforcement and a stronger enforcement of the noise and nuisance. And I agree with the law department, we have to also look at the resource. We cannot tie up all the department with a lot of all these evidence and all sorts of things to present to court. So we give them an opportunity to say, okay, let's plead the case, there is an opportunity for you to plead guilty and pay a fine and move on. And at the same time also, we talked the last time about permit, because there are a lot of things that people are doing, even special events or birthday and things like that for the, the young kids. We should work on instituting a permit, and that permit will carry a lot of information about the host. So the PD, instead of going down there, they can, from the precinct, they can call the host and ask them to, we receive complaint, you should turn your music down, and if your permit is expired, you should take it off. So I think that is something that we should look into. And we talk about fireworks.
Yes.
We need to look at that also.
Yeah, it's not in here.
Because that is a bit noise nuisance also. Now, how do we do that? This is where I go back to the affidavit. If the person can sign that affidavit and say, yes, my neighbor John light off, a whole bunch of fireworks, so be it. Show up to court and testify. And those we have to give people that opportunity to do that. But I just want to go back to the modified speaker. I am going to try to reach out to Commissioner and our Corporation Council to see how we can draft something to add to this, to modify this at the same time in terms of addressing these loud speakers from cars.
Ms. Vincini?
Well, I was just looking at, maybe with the scale of, like you mentioned, the egregious violators and those that are repeat violators, is what we have in code now sufficient enough. That there, obviously debarring should probably be an option depending on the numbers. But then, those repeat offenders, like we want to look at the fines and increase them because there's a lot of resources to trial. So I think that's one way to take a look at it, so we can address those repeat offenders in a way that's determined.
So you're advocating for increased the fines or not?
Yeah.
Yes or no?
Yes, yeah.
I'm sorry, Ms. Patrick, your hand was up before.
Well, I just, the enforcement piece, I think as we go in, I think we have to be realistic as well in terms of the numbers of people that staffing. So as we start to go into our budget discussions, we have to be aware of that, because it also, when I think about the traffic measures, which we will also be addressing again on Monday, it's the same issue. I think actually the mayor started our meeting by talking about the priorities, and our chief brought it up as well, because these are not going to be their high priorities. So we either have to increase the staffing so that they can, be able to allocate their human resources in a way to help us enforce these things. Because I think the enforcement is key, whether it's speeding, the red lights. We had some, when we first started these discussions about the traffic stuff, basically, or if we, on my ride along, they're like, well, we can't necessarily go to, after somebody that's going through a red light, if we're gonna get a call that, something more serious is happening. So how do we I think we have to, I just wanna bring that up, that when we start our budget discussions, I think this is gonna be something we need to think about.
So, first of all, I think we should increase the fees especially based on what our corporation counsel is saying, because that gives them room to negotiate, so. Raise it up a little bit and they can come to what we would really like to get, so I think that's, part of it. In terms of enforcement, I agree. However, I'm not sure if we increase our staff, if it's still gonna get them to this place. Because it's sometimes it's days that you call a noise violation.
No, I know.
And they show up like 3 days
Well, we
later.
have to find out what
Part is
they
over,
think.
it's done. So I'm not sure if increasing staffing is going to address that in that way, because what I believe will happen is then the higher priority calls still come first, they still will. So I'm not sure if that's necessarily the answer. I think that part of it is that people don't know that there's a fine. People aren't
Definitely
aware.
think we need to do
We
that.
have to put the information out there.
I agree.
You will get a fine for it.
I agree.
And then we have to, I don't know if even it needs to be the police department, do we even have a separate department that just handles getting those fines out there?
I totally agree with that too.
So, and that might be a little less expensive than having the police trying to do that. So I think we have to look at it at various ways, which is most beneficial financially for the city and for people to say, I'm not gonna do that. And then just to basically respect your neighbors. Because that's really what it really boils down to. Only you're concerned about you and your party, and you don't care that, that over here I'm living with an elderly person, or I have a dog, or whatever the situation may be. So I think that I don't think we do enough to inform the public about really like the mayor talks about behavior a lot, but we talk about behavior around this table. And how often do we talk about behavior to our community?
Mr. Toro?
And I agree with Ms. Porterfield, zero tolerance. I mean, it needs to get out there. It won't be tolerated. Even though we're not going to be able to enforce it right now the way we want to, zero tolerance, there's a fine. It might deter some. And again, as AC Antonovich said, I've been working for 3 years with the PD on this ticket, which is almost ready. So it's not going to be when the police come and issue a ticket, it's not going to be a 2-hour kind of ticket. It's going to be a quick appearance ticket. It's going to be boom, boom, boom. Check off what your offenses are at that particular time, in triplicate, hand it off, and you're out of there. They sign it and you're gone. So that will allow them to, when they're driving down the street, there's a muffler in front of them and they want to ticket it. They don't want to pull them over right now. You know why? Because they're on the way to another call. You don't know what's in queue, waiting for them to respond to. So all those things. But again, zero tolerance. We can't. I mean, my neighborhood is just insane. Insane.
It's definitely Mr. Mancini, but I want to make a comment that I've heard multiple times, like in our current political system and in the military, non-enforceable law is a suggestion. So I hear you guys highlight the importance of enforcement. We know we don't have it because they're limited in what they can respond to, and also we're limited in how many officers we have. So where's the give? And if we then say we're gonna say we have zero tolerance, no one in the back end, we don't have the ability to respond to them. I feel like we're setting our community up for disappointment. Mr. Mancini?
I was just wondering, in offenses, our ACOD's options, like you get some people, it might be their first time, or they get ticketed, there's a fine, and then we'll give you an ACOD, which would be adjourned in 6
Sorry,
months.
was an ACOD?
Adjourned with contemplation of
Oh, okay,
dismissal, then
okay.
if 6 months without any violations, we can dismiss it.
Excuse me, please.
Look at the different sentencing options.
Who's keeping track of it?
Right.
Well, that would be
That's
our more complaints coming in, and
How do you know I got an ACOD? How do you know when I come? Is the judge gonna be able to know that the law department would say, this is not the first time, Marion has been here 3 times before, so no more ACODs for her.
Well,
They must know that, right?
the court would have a record of the ACODs, but if you're, that sounds different, that's like reducing the penalty, whereas you're talking about increasing, so.
No.
I was thinking we're going to increase the fine, but there are those that okay, I screwed up, and just as another option.
Yeah, we can always offer an ACOD. I mean, there's exceptions to every rule, but generally, like I said, we typically offer 150, 200.
Because it's used in criminal matters all the time.
Right,
But,
if the council wants
no,
us to.
it's just a conversation, it's just a conversation, that's all.
I am not in favor of ADOD.
Stop that.
German contemplation of noise. In the end,
So we have to bear in mind, and I can speak historically on being on the council. Every time we make changes to any city laws, it creates, or it asks for more resource to enforce it. We can say, we can change chapter 130, 182 and 183 and say, let it go there, and we expect the PD to enforce it. We're being unfair to any department if we were to do that. So we have to factor in that, because this, what we're doing here is good for our community, but at the same time, we need to give the department the resource to enforce it. And let me just go back a little bit and talk about nuisance department. Back in time, there was only one person.
Right,
We have 4 now.
yeah.
And it's the reason why we're seeing that our neighborhood are being cleaned. It is because of the resource at their disposal. They're fully staffed, and they're going out there every single day,
Yeah.
and they're enforcing the violation and issuing ticket. And we're seeing our neighborhood are cleaning. Day by day, we're seeing cleaning. So the same thing gonna be happening here. We're gonna have to make sure that we revise this to the best that we can, to make sure that our neighborhood are being addressed with their concern, but at the same time address resource to make sure that is put in place, and they don't have to wait 3 days. We're gonna have the drones, and we have somebody man the drone, we have somebody right there to take care of that, to go over there, issue appearance ticket, and person show up to court, and then, it takes a course from there on.
Ms. Patrick?
So just to piggyback on that, I do think that, I totally agree, and I think that first of all, we need to continue having them at the table.
Yes.
And I know he had to leave, so, but I mean, as we move forward, obviously they'd still be involved in these discussions, but, because I've always thought maybe there's a way to, enlist the help of retirees from in other words, there might be creative solutions, to some of the staffing issues, but that's, we need them to be, voicing their opinions on that. I just wanted to reiterate that I think whether it's this issue, whether it's the traffic issue, whether it's the trash issue, the education and the behavioral change is key. So I think we are going to have to think about that and think about how do we advertise it, how do we market it, what are the resources that we're going to need to do that. And then I also just want to say 2 things before we leave, or just so when we continue our discussion, we do need to talk about animals, and we do need to talk about the parks.
Animals in what way?
The noise that, there might be dogs that are left outside for, 8 hours or something, and they're barking like crazy. It's in here, but I'm just saying it's something that we didn't talk about here, and I do want us to do that. And then also just those public parks that we all, I think we all can see when we are walking in our parks that, there's vehicles that are making noise, there's people that are making noise, it doesn't matter the day or, the time. So, one thing that I noticed, I think that, again, it's a resource thing, but we might want to have signage in our parks where the non-emergency number is visible on signage in terms of, how does somebody report a complaint as well. So those were the last things that I just wanted to indicate before we leave.
But before I go, next meeting, can we have both chapters 182 and 183 so that we can kind of refer to 183 too, because whatever, some of what
At
we
the
do
next
here.
meeting, you say?
The next meeting, yes. So we'll kind of we must look at both chapters.
Any other questions or comments?
Well, what's our next, in other words, back to what you said in terms of the other email, or the end of the email that you received today, I want to make sure that we do take action. So I just didn't, wanted to see what your thoughts were in terms of an action plan and our timeline and that type of thing.
So I would say in my recommendations earlier with focusing on adjusting the time frame for unreasonable noise, adjusting the fines, and then focusing on the permits, I think that takes into account that our enforcement is our enforcement. So I don't foresee or forecast any significant changes to the police department's staffing levels. I think enforcement is affected in a positive way with the introduction of drones, which according to AC Antinovich's accounts are potentially end of this year, hopefully the beginning of next year.
Early, yeah.
So again, we're asking the community to be patient, which they've been doing for a number of years. So that is why increasing the fines, I think gives Ms. Rosh's department the ability to, when we respond to the few instances that we can, that it has more of a substantial impact to the thing that everyone cares most about, which is your wallet. But also it has a reverberating impact in the community that they are no longer accepting pleas because the instances that we do respond to are such a small composite of all of the issues throughout our city. We need that to have a magnified impact. So I think if we were responding to a few instances, those instances that we're responding to need to have weight and impact, if that makes sense.
So I guess, I think, basically, what's Monday's meeting gonna look like in terms of, what will we leave from this, what will you be bringing from this meeting, your committee, to the meeting on Monday? That's the question.
So I'd say, listening to the collective, I know this is not a full representation of our collective council. It seems as if we're saying we need to increase awareness, which I agree on. However, we need to allow the ticketing process as it currently exists to continue on. And I'm trying to be positive, but it sounds like we need to increase enforcement, which we can, but we need to make sure the community is aware that there is a ticketing, which to some degree I don't think is going to have an impact on your ability to adhere to being a good Samaritan or not.
Well, I thought we would increasing the fines was one of the discussions for
I
Monday.
would say from the individuals in the committee, it seems as though they're very
They don't want
hesitant,
to
so they won't get out of the committee.
This is a
Oh,
committee
Mr.
meeting.
Rivera?
So no, I'm just gonna, Monday's meeting, so what is the purpose of Monday's meeting? Because we're still discussing here, we're gathering information
Right.
and then present, so what are we gonna discuss Monday? Should we now wait, hold another special meeting, special public safety meeting, try to get some draft information in and present to the entire council Monday?
So what I would ask is for everyone to, as you had your comments, I took a vigorous amount of notes, and I think our city clerk is also taking notes also. I would ask in a similar format, if everyone could just document your takeaways and either send those in this mic, or you can, well, I'd say that's probably the best case. And then we compile them, but in addition, I think there's a lot of credibility to Commissioner Devine's comment of looking at both chapter 182 and 183 collectively in that point system. So I think regardless of how we started this meeting, I think we still have good work or good outcomes to work towards. Ms. Patrick?
Yeah,
Well, I hope-
sorry. So why don't you, it's on the agenda Monday, so
yeah.
why don't you give the entire council an update on what was the discussion or today? And then we continue and then come up with our recommendation to the entire council, because we're gonna discuss the same thing Monday, doesn't make any sense.
No.
So I think-
I don't think that's what he said. I think he's saying that we just give a report of what
Yeah,
happened.
so that's it, the chair can give you a
Yes, that's what he
report on
said.
what happened, like what Ms. Patrick did. And we still continue to meet, still continue to put information together and come up with a draft and then present to the full council.
I agree.
So I don't know how much of a discussion we're gonna have Monday, because there's a lot of discussion here and a lot of takeaways for us to come up with to start work on drafts.
But I mean, one of the points was looking at the point system. I think having that as a kind of light bulb moment of that is an option we can have as an objective. I think if we have that continued discussion as a council, that might be something we're willing to move on for in our committee. So I would say as long as if we capture all of the takeaways and then we come into Monday and I do a summarization, but if you feel more emboldened to want to take a
Make a motion.
take a direction, we can. So I think that's why leaving it is important, but still continue, like I have never read 182 yet, or 183, so I will, and I then may be more open to a different direction.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying, Mr. Chair, so sorry. So to kind of give a summary next Monday, and then let's continue to work. Let's continue to work and make sure we address every section under both chapters, and then bring it out to the full council.
Gotcha.
Once we can get that agreement, so move forward with.
I just think that, I do want to say that I think that there might be things that, I absolutely think we need to, summarize our own questions and comments and get that to Ms. Maiku. I definitely think we have to look at the other ordinance as well. and review that, but I hope that, there might be some things where we might even on Monday be able to make recommendations for motions,
Like increasing the fees?
like increasing the fees or,
You'd have to call for a public
No,
hearing.
we already-
well, we do have the public hearing, when is the public hearing?
There's no call for a public hearing on this.
Oh, there isn't, I thought there was already.
If you wanted to do
Let's
that.
take our time, let's not jump the gun here, we should
Okay.
do all
I
together.
think, what is the public hearing that's coming up, is it, we have some public
There
hearings.
is no public.
Okay, what is it?
No.
Okay,
And I just want to, and I
well,
think.
then that's something we should
We
do.
need to talk to the law department and, the police department and probably the law department as well. I wanna really just caution us in terms of the use of drones and people feeling about the whole Big Brother thing. Because that may come into, I think that's gonna become a conversation. Where people feel like drones are over neighborhoods to pretty much control their behavior. So I'm not sure that if that's something we could even do, or how much we wanna do that. So I think we should look into the legality of that.
Well, I think we've already moved forward with purchasing these drones and heard from our police department in terms of some of the various uses for the drones. I hear what you're saying, but I think it's the same, I'm still hoping that there's gonna be speed cameras on the red lights, it's the same thing. But we do have a responsibility to be trying to look, and it's new technology, it is where we're at, in terms of the world, in terms of being able to use the technology that now is at our, available to us to be able to enforce things. We may just have to take some flack, but I agree that when we have the public hearing, we might hear, we're gonna hear, I would have to say that probably increasing the fines, we're gonna hear from people that are gonna say this is gonna be too much of a hardship, et cetera, in some of our, I'm just saying, there's gonna be various opinions based on people's income levels, et cetera, where they're, but I get that we wanna have zero tolerance. So there's lots of
That's
stuff.
the term I'm gonna use, so.
But
It's like out there, people aren't really crazy about it.
Yeah, so we will hear all that at the public hearing, but we're gonna have to still, take all that information in hand and still make our own decisions based on what
As
we
long as
learn.
we're on good legal standing,
Yeah.
that for me is a concern.
Oh, yeah,
Just to make sure
absolutely.
that they can't sue us or anything for that, so as long as we make sure that we have that. Because people are very litigious and we get sued for a lot of things.
So can I just ask, what exactly are you looking for from the law department for Monday?
So I'd say disregard nothing. So I think we're still in the
Yeah.
information gathering phase. I
Okay.
think your perspective was very valid and helped guide the conversation, so thank you. But just to capture, I'm going to take a summary of the notes I took. I'm gonna ask everyone to still send your notes to Ms. Maiku. We'll cross compare before Monday's meeting, but unless there are other directions we'd like to discuss, I think to Mr. Newberry's point, I don't wanna take just an expedient approach, but I want to ensure that we are still working towards an outcome.
Yes, I guess that's,
Yeah.
because I think we do hear it often from folks that this council, we hear that complaint that you brought up earlier, that we need to take some action.
So definitely thank you for everyone taking the time.
Thank you for-
I'd say unless there were any other questions or concerns, we have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned.
Sam, can you provide transcript to us?
I'll try.
Yes, if you don't mind.
Yeah, you know that broke down while we were meeting.
That's all right, will still help us,
No, you know when it broke down?
but
The mayor was still up there.